Commander Elias Rook stood alone inside the broken remains of a ship drifting near a shattered moon. The place was a mess of twisted metal and burned wires. Smoke floated in the air, thick and choking, and red warning lights blinked weakly from dying systems. He stepped through the wreckage with a steady grip on his weapon, his boots crunching on shattered glass and scorched flooring. The ship had sent a weak emergency beacon, and though everyone had assumed it was already lost, Elias had followed the signal alone, hoping to find at least some answers. What he didn't expect was the sound. Not an alarm, not the hiss of gas. A sound that didn't belong there at all. It was soft, broken, but clear. A child's cry. It echoed through the wreck like a ghost's whisper, pulling him deeper into the shadows of the corridor. He knew what he was hearing, but couldn't believe it. There shouldn't be anyone alive, certainly not a baby. He moved quickly but carefully, stepping over fallen beams and broken pipes. The deeper he went, the colder the air felt. Main life support was long dead, and frost covered the walls. That meant whatever was crying had survived without the ship's systems. He rounded a corner and kicked through a half-jammed door, entering a small chamber that looked like a medical bay or a personal quarters, hard to tell anymore with the damage. That's when he saw her. She stood still in the center of the room, the only figure upright among the ruin. She was tall and wore a deep purple coat that shimmered like silk despite being torn in several places. Her skin was smooth and pale, blue, glowing slightly in the emergency lighting. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto Elias as he raised his weapon instinctively. She didn't move to attack or run. Instead, she gently turned to the side, revealing the bundle in her arms. Wrapped in silver thermal foil, something moved small, weak, but alive. The cry came again, louder this time. It was a baby. Elias stared, stunned. The child's face poked out from the blanket. Round cheeks, smooth skin, a tiny mouth trembling with the effort of crying. And unmistakably human. His training screamed at him to ask questions, to secure the area, to report back. But all of that fell away as he took a step closer, eyes locked on the infant. There was no mistake. This baby wasn't alien. It looked like someone from Earth. It looked like him. The alien woman looked down at the child, her lips parted in disbelief. She spoke softly, almost to herself. Her voice trembled. She said she didn't understand. This shouldn't be possible. Her hand shook slightly as she brushed the child's hair back and then looked at Elias again. This time her voice was firmer, but still filled with shock. Words hit him harder than any weapon could. She said, "This is your child." Elias froze. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The alarms faded. The flickering lights felt distant. He looked at the baby again, and then at the woman. Something inside him stirred memories he didn't have, emotions he couldn't explain. It was impossible, yet the truth was right in front of him. The child's face, the shape of its eyes, the curl of its small hands, they weren't just human, they were familiar. She stepped forward, her voice still soft. She didn't look like an enemy. There was no hatred in her eyes, only confusion, fear, and something else, sadness. She seemed just as lost as he was. Elias lowered his weapon slowly, not fully understanding what was happening, but knowing that this moment was real. A child had survived a disaster. A child that shouldn't exist. A child that somehow was his. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But the truth stared back at him through the baby's innocent, tear-filled eyes. And the alien woman, whoever she truly was, had risked everything to protect it, in the middle of a dead ship, surrounded by wreckage and silence. Elias Rook found something that made no sense, but felt more important than anything he had ever known. ChatGPT said. Elias stood still. The silence between him and the alien woman filled with questions that neither of them could put into words. The baby in her arms whimpered softly, unaware of the storm brewing around it. The woman stepped back, slightly, her eyes never leaving Elias, as if she expected him to reject the child, to deny everything she just said. But Elias couldn't move, couldn't speak. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just been said. How could a child like this human, alive and so young, exist out here, light years from Earth? And how could it possibly be? He had no memory of this woman, no memory of any encounter that could lead to this. Yet the more he looked at the child, the more something deep in his chest tightened. Not fear. Something older, protective, like a string had been pulled inside him, tied directly to this child's tiny heartbeat. The alien woman slowly knelt, placing the baby gently into a soft carry pod on the floor that looked like some kind of mobile cradle. Her hands lingered on the edge, brushing back the baby's dark hair, before she stood up straight again and faced Elias properly. She spoke quietly, choosing her words carefully, as if each one had the weight of 1,000 truths. She said she had been assigned to a joint research outpost, a secret one, far from the borders of known systems. The mission had been cooperation and experiment between her kind and humans. Something about genetic understanding and shared growth. She mentioned a memory program, an accident, and then her voice cracked. Her hands clenched slightly. She said, "There was a moment of peace before everything fell apart, before the attack, before they were betrayed." Elias listened, trying to follow, but so much of it felt like listening to someone describe a dream he had once had and forgotten. She looked at him again, more intensely now, as if trying to see if he remembered anything. When he didn't speak, her voice grew cold, or not angry, but hurt. She said his memories were likely wiped, altered to protect the project, or perhaps by those who didn't want the child to exist. The baby was also part of her kind, her blood. And the result of something more than science. A connection that had been formed between them, despite species, despite worlds. Elias felt like the floor had dropped beneath him. He tried to speak, but nothing came. So instead, he did what he knew. He walked toward the child, knelt beside the carry pod, and looked closely. The baby's tiny hand reached out, grabbing one of his gloved fingers with surprising strength. And there, in that fragile grip, Elias felt something. Impossible, something that confirmed everything she said without needing a word. He stood up again, slowly, turning toward the woman. They both knew now that no matter how this had come to be, the child was theirs, a piece of both worlds, life caught between two species, two fates. And now two people who had no map for what came next? A sudden tremor rocked the wreckage, and the ship creaked in warning. The orbit was decaying. They didn't have long. The woman looked around, her instincts sharp. She said the enemies who destroyed the research base would return once they realized the signal had been answered. And if they found the child alive, they wouldn't hesitate to finish what they started. Elias didn't ask who the enemies were. It didn't matter. What mattered now was getting the child to safety. He reached out, offering his hand to her not in demand, but as a silent agreement, a shared promise. She stared at his hand for a second, then took it. Together, they moved quickly, gathering the few supplies still usable and heading toward the emergency exit shaft near the rear of the wreck. As they walked, she told him the child had no name yet. They had never reached that moment. Down at the baby and said it was time, he chose one. Elias thought for a long second, then whispered a name that came from deep inside, from a place he hadn't known still existed. She nodded, smiling for the first time, and repeated the name, softly. As they reached the airlock, Elias looked back one last time at the ruined ship, the place where the past had died, but the future had somehow been born. Then he stepped out into the stars, holding on to the only thing that now mattered more than his own life. The small, fragile hope that had just reached for his hand. The escape pod jolted as it broke away from the wreckage, metal groaning under pressure as it tore free from the dying ship. Elias sat with the baby cradled carefully in his arms, while the alien woman, still silent and tense, watched the stars flash by through the small viewport. Neither of them spoke much, the moment too heavy for words. The child, wrapped in layers of thermal foil and held close to Elias's chest, had stopped crying. Maybe it was the warmth. Elias had never held a child before, but something about it felt natural. Tracking nearby threats and updating the pod's destination, she said they couldn't go back to any known human colony. The people who destroyed the research base had eyes everywhere, and they wouldn't stop until the child was erased, as if he had never existed. She believed there was a hidden outpost, a safe place once used by scientists as a neutral zone. It wasn't far, but it would be a dangerous route. Elias nodded without hesitation. He didn't care about the risks. The child mattered more than any order, mission, or memory he'd lost. As the pod coasted through space, powered by emergency thrusters, Elias tried to remember anything about the past Sailari described. He couldn't, but strange feelings kept rising, familiar things. The sound of her voice felt like something he once loved. The way she looked at the child torn between fear and fierce protection felt like something he understood deeply. Sailari didn't push him to remember. Instead, she explained the project more clearly. Years ago, during a time of secret peace, a few human and alien scientists tried something new. Not war, not trade, but unity. They hoped that through shared life through a child born from both races, they could find something stronger than treaties or weapons. Elias had volunteered, she said. Not as a soldier, but as a man searching for purpose. But then came the attack. Someone had leaked the project's location. The science became a threat. The child, still unborn at the time, was seen as a weapon or worse, a mistake. Sailari had escaped during the chaos, hiding inside the wrecked part of the ship where no one thought to search. She gave birth in silence, in darkness, surrounded by metal and fire, alone, except for the tiny life she protected. Elias was dead or erased. When his signal appeared days later, she didn't believe it at first. Now, she wondered if fate had pulled them back together, even through memory loss and shattered galaxies. The pod trembled as it passed near an asteroid field, forcing Sailari to adjust their course. Elias helped steady the cradle, using his body to shield the child. He didn't speak, but his actions spoke for him. Every move, every glance toward the baby said the same thing. He had already accepted the truth. This child was his. Nothing else mattered now. As they neared the coordinates of the hidden outpost, Sailari warned that the place might be abandoned or worse, compromised. But they had no choice. They couldn't run forever. The baby needed safety, stability, a chance to grow without being hunted. The pod systems blinked, showing signs of nearby structures a signal, weak but real. They approached carefully, weapons ready, hearts tight with fear. The outpost appeared slowly through the fog of space dust. A small moon base, hidden beneath rock and shadow, camouflaged by ancient tech. No signs of life yet. Elias prepared for anything. As the pod landed with a soft thud, the doors hissed open, weapons drawn. They stepped into the base, silent, cold, long abandoned but untouched. Lights flickered as old generators kicked in. No traps, no signs of enemies. Relief flooded both of them, but they didn't let their guard down completely. They sealed the entrance behind them, activated inner doors, and moved deeper. The base still had power, water, and shelter. It was enough. Elias set up a cradle from spare blankets and storage crates. The baby slept, unaware of the danger, unaware of the sacrifices made just so he could breathe. Sailari sat nearby, exhaustion showing in every movement. For the first time, they weren't strangers, or soldiers, or survivors. Just a mother and father, staring at the small miracle between them. The past was broken, the future uncertain, but in that quiet moment they had something rare in the galaxy, a reason to hope. The moon base, though old and dusty, gave them shelter, and for a short time it felt like peace. Elias moved through its silent halls, checking each section, bringing lights back online, and securing the entrances. The base had been designed for scientists, not soldiers, but it had enough equipment to survive. There was a hydro generator, air recycler still running under emergency settings, and a small greenhouse with dormant crops that could be revived. Sailari focused on caring for the baby, using her advanced medical knowledge and the few supplies she had left from the escape pod. She kept the child warm, fed, and safe, whispering to him in her native tongue when he fussed. Elias watched her closely whenever she did, feeling a strange ache deep inside. He didn't know the words, but the meaning was always clear. She loved the child with all she had left. The more Elias stayed near her and the baby, the more that quiet pull inside him grew stronger. It wasn't just instinct or duty anymore. It was something personal, something real. He felt like a missing part of himself was slowly returning, piece by piece. As he spent his days learning how to be a father to a child he hadn't known he had, and a partner to a woman whose eyes reminded him of distant stars, but the peace didn't last long. It never did. On the 5th day, the long-range scanner picked up movement-tone-identified ships entering the system. Solari was the first to notice the signal. She didn't panic, but her face turned pale as she studied the readings. The same type of ships that had attacked the research outposts were now closing in on their location. They hadn't been fast enough. Elias immediately sprang into action, checking all possible escape routes. But the base was deep in the rock and built to hide, not run. If the enemy found them, they'd be trapped. They both knew it. Solari said they had one choice too: hide the baby. She revealed a hidden room beneath the greenhouse, once used for biological samples. It was lined with lead and energy-dampening materials. A perfect shield. The plan was simple: hide the child there with enough oxygen and warmth, and hope the invaders didn't find him. Elias didn't want to agree at first. The thought of leaving his child alone, even for a minute, felt wrong. But logic and fear left no room for other ideas. It placed the baby gently into the small chamber surrounding him with heat pads and placing a small monitor linked to Elias's wrist. The screen showed his breathing, heart rate, and temperature. Elias kissed the child's forehead and held his small hand one last time before sealing the hatch. He promised he would come back, said it aloud, even if the baby couldn't understand. Then he turned, weapon in hand, and took his place beside Solari near the entrance. Hours passed in silence. The hum of the base was the only sound. Then, without warning, the outer sensors flashed red. The ships had landed. Multiple life forms approached. Elias and Solari moved together without speaking, taking up positions near the doors, blasters ready, hearts pounding. When the enemy broke through, they came fast, black-armored soldiers with glowing visors, weapons drawn, sweeping the halls with precision. They shouted commands in a strange language, searching room by room. Elias fired first, catching the front soldier with a clean shot, while Solari used her speed and agility to strike from the shadows. They fought fiercely, not for victory, but for time. The battle moved through the base like fire. Blaster fire lit the halls. Metal screamed, bodies fell. Elias took a hit in the shoulder but kept moving, protecting the greenhouse above all. Solari moved like lightning, her people's combat style fluid and precise. But the enemy was well trained, and they had numbers. Slowly, the defense fell back. When they reached the core chamber, Elias triggered a trap explosives rig too. The roof, a section collapsed, sealing off the path to the hidden chamber. With their child behind that wall, Elias and Solari made their final stand. Bloodied and tired, they fought with everything they had. For the baby, for each other, for what they had lost and found again. And just when it seemed like they'd be overrun, a strange pulse echoed through the base. The invaders froze, staring at something unseen. Then, just as fast as they came, they retreated. No warning, no reason. Silence returned. Elias staggered, his breath heavy, and looked to Solari. Her arm was burned, but she was alive. They rushed to the sealed chamber and broke it open. Baby was there, unharmed, still asleep. Elias held him close, trembling. He didn't know why the enemy left. He didn't understand the strange pulse. But one thing was certain. His child was not just a target. He was something more. Something powerful. And now, Elias knew, the real danger hadn't even begun. The silence after the attack felt heavier than the battle itself. Elias sat beside the hidden chamber, the baby resting quietly in his arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that brought a strange kind of peace. Solari sat. Nearby, her arm bandaged, her eyes distant, staring into the dark corners of the base as if expecting the enemy to return. But they didn't. Not that day, not the next. Days passed in uneasy calm. The base, though damaged, still functioned. Elias repaired what he could: security doors, lights, food processors, while Solari monitored signals from orbit, waiting for signs of a second wave. None came. But both of them knew that what happened during the attack was not normal. Invaders had the upper hand, yet they had suddenly stopped, turned, and left like shadows fleeing light. Elias couldn't explain it. But Salary had a theory, one that frightened her more than the attack itself. She believed the child had done something. Not with words, not with movement, but with presence. A pulse had passed through the air. Silent yet deep, like a voice carried through the bones of the ship. She said it was not technology. It was something older. Something living. Elias didn't want to believe it at first. But as the days went on, he began to notice things. The air around the baby was always warm, even when systems failed. His cries never echoed. They seemed to calm the very walls. When Elias left a sharp tool near the child's cradle, it rolled away on its own, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The baby's eyes, bright, deep, almost glowing at times, would sometimes fix on empty space. And in those moments, strange things would happen. Machines turned off. Lights flickered. Silence thickened. Solari called it ancestral energy, something ancient from her people's past, once believed to be myth. But now waking again through a child not born from war or cloning, but from two different worlds meeting in peace. The baby, she said, was a link, a living bridge between species, capable of more than anyone could guess. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his chest. If what she said was true, then it wasn't just bounty hunters or soldiers after them. It would be empires, governments, secret science cults. Everyone. They needed answers, and not just theories. Solari remembered an ancient temple hidden deep within a shattered moon, far beyond any charted system. It had once been a sacred site for her people, long forgotten. Even forbidden, but if there were any clues to the baby's power, it would be there. Elias agreed without question. They spent the next 2 days preparing the old escape craft. In the base's hangar, wasn't fast, but it would get them there. Supplies were loaded, systems checked, weapons sharpened. The baby was placed into a special pod made from soft, shock-absorbent material and layered with radiation shielding. As they left the moon base behind, Elias looked back only once, then forward, knowing this path had no return. The journey through space was rough. Asteroid fields, solar storms, ghost signals all tried to delay them, but they pressed on. Elias took the controls, while Salari mapped the stars, guiding them through forgotten corridors of space where few dared travel. As they neared the shattered moon, its broken surface came into view, a jagged mass of rock and ruins, half floating in space. The temple was buried deep in its core, accessible only through narrow tunnels and shifting gravity wells. They docked the ship at an ancient platform, worn and cracked, but still standing. The air was thin, but breathable. They carried the baby, carefully wrapped in a layered cloak, and began the descent into the moon's heart. The path was dark, lit only by glowing vines that pulsed with faint energy. The temple was carved into the stone itself. Massive doors etched with symbols Elias couldn't read, but which made the baby stir in his arms. As they entered the central chamber, a strange stillness fell over them. The walls were alive with echoes, memories burned into the stone. At the center of the chamber stood a single stone cradle. Older than anything Elias had ever seen, Solari placed the baby inside, and the ground trembled slightly.
Lights burst to life.
Lights burst to life, not bulbs or wires, but glowing roots that ran through the rock, pulsing in rhythm with the child's heartbeat. The air shimmered. And then they came visions, not real, not ghosts, but something in between. Tall beings, robed and faceless, stood around the cradle, watching silently. Solari knelt, whispering prayers from her childhood. Elias stood frozen, watching as the baby's eyes opened wide, glowing with soft golden light. The robed figures, raised their hands slowly, and without a sound, Elias felt understanding fill his mind. The child was not a weapon. He was a signal, a start, a warning, a hope. Something had been sleeping beneath the stars, waiting for a moment like this. When the visions faded, only silence remained. Elias picked up the child, his body warm and calm. Sailari rose slowly, her eyes wet with tears, not of fear but reverence. They didn't speak as they left the temple. They didn't need to. The truth had settled between them like gravity, heavy, undeniable, and full of purpose. The child they carried was no longer just their son. He was something the galaxy had, not seen in ages, and now that galaxy would soon come looking. They returned from the ancient moon in silence, hearts full and minds heavy. The ship hummed softly through the quiet stretches of space, stars drifting past like slow sparks. Elias held the baby close, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest, feeling the warmth that never seemed to fade. Solari sat beside him, one hand resting on the child's back, the other gripping the edge of her seat as if holding the moment together. Neither of them spoke much. There was no need. The visions from the temple had answered the questions they feared to ask and opened new ones. The baby was more than just their son now. He was a symbol, a turning point. And the galaxy would not let that go unnoticed. On the third day of their return journey, the sensors blinked red. Ships were coming, not bounty hunters, not mercenaries. These were sleek royal crafts, glowing with deep blue light, and carried with them a strange presence, noble, cold, and absolute. Solari's breath caught. She recognized them. They were from the Galactic throne ship, the ancient seat of her people's ruling houses. That meant only one thing. The Highborn had learned of the child. They did not come with warships. They came with silence, and that silence was more dangerous than any weapon. Elias slowed the ship, keeping it near an asteroid field for cover, but it was no use. The royal ships surrounded them without firing a single shot. A voice crackled through the comes, not harsh, not kind, just sharp. They requested a meeting, not with weapons, but with the child. Solari's expression darkened. She knew what that meant. It was not a request. It was a demand, wrapped in polite words. Elias looked at her. She gave a single nod. They would face them, but they would not surrender the child. They landed in a neutral station orbiting a dead planet Told, empty and forgotten. The station still held gravity and air. It's a perfect place for a quiet talk that wouldn't be recorded. When they stepped out with the baby wrapped in soft cloth, a group of tall, pale figures awaited them. Regal and cold, their eyes glowed faintly, filled with judgment. At the center stood a woman tall, silver-eyed, and dressed in ceremonial armor. This was her elder sister, Virith, the heir to their house, and a woman known for her cruelty masked as honor. Virith said nothing at first. Her gaze locked on the baby, and for a long moment, no one moved. Then she whispered something in the old tongue, a word that meant awakening. Her voice was unreadable. She stepped forward, demanding to examine the child. Elias refused. The voice was quiet but firm. The air tensed. Solari stood between them, her body tense as a drawn bow. She said the child was protected by the old law, the one written in the ruins of the temple they had just visited. Virith's expression shifted. The ancient law, forgotten rule, lost to most of the galaxy, but still written into the foundation of their royal traditions. It declared that a being born from two worlds, carrying power not of war but of peace, could not be claimed, owned, or controlled by any throne. Elias could see the rage just behind Virith's calm face. She couldn't strike them here, not without breaking that law and risking 1,000-year shame. But her eyes promised that this wasn't over. They left the station quickly. No one tried to stop them. But from that day forward, Elias knew they would be hunted not with guns, but with politics, secrets, and ancient shadows. As they flew through space once again, Elias asked Sailari what came next. She looked down at the baby, then at Elias, and said the words he would never forget. "We don't run anymore. We build." She spoke of a hidden world once used by her people during wars long past a world shielded, hidden in plasma clouds and cloaked from sensors. A place where outcasts built homes, where secrets grew roots. They could go there not to hide but to make something new. A home, a sanctuary, a future. And if others came again, they would not find a frightened family. They would find a people. Ready to protect what mattered, the journey to that hidden world took weeks. The child grew stronger each day. He began to recognize voices, to laugh softly, to reach out with curious fingers. Lights around him still flickered sometimes, and when he cried, machines listened. But he was happy, safe. Elias learned how to feed him, how to hold him when he fussed, how to wrap him against his chest when they traveled. Solari watched them both with quiet eyes, sometimes smiling, sometimes blinking away thoughts too heavy to share. At last, the hidden world appeared, a blue-green sphere wrapped in clouds of light, unseen by any scanner. They landed quietly. There were people, there were aliens, humans, hybrids all lost to the galaxy, all building lives in secret. The people welcomed them not with questions, but with nods. They understood. Elias stepped onto the soft ground, the baby in his arms, Salary, beside him. He looked at the sky and felt something new. Not fear, not duty, but purpose. They had no flag, no army, no throne, but they had each other, and a child who would one day change everything. Together, they would build a place where no empire could reach. And if the galaxy came for them again, it would find not a family in hiding, but a legacy rising from the stars. ChatGPT said, "Life on the hidden world began like the slow start of a new morning quiet, uncertain, but full of promise." Elias spent his days helping the settlers repair old buildings and grow crops using simple tools and recycled machines. The people there came from many places. Some had been hunted, some forgotten, and others simply tired of endless wars and shifting power. No one asked questions about the child Elias carried. They only smiled, offered help, and watched with quiet wonder whenever the baby laughed or reached out his hand. The baby, now a few months old, had started to show signs of something even more unusual. When he cried, broken machines sparked to life. When he laughed, dying plants stood taller. One morning, Elias found their water purifier fully repaired. Though no one had touched it, people began calling the baby the Quiet Light, not as a title, but as a gentle sign of hope. Solari knew the power inside him was still growing, still learning what it was. She stayed close, teaching him songs from her world, telling stories in whispers that made the stars seem less far away. Then the first dream came. Elias woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The image of fire and sky collapsing burned into his mind. He wasn't alone. Solari had the same dream flashes of ships breaking through clouds, towers falling, and a cold voice echoing through empty space, saying the child must be claimed, or all would be lost. The next day, the sky changed. Faint pulse passed over. The world like a wave of static, too soft to hear, but strong enough to freeze every creature in silence for a single breath. Birds stopped. Wind paused. Even the sun seemed to dim. That was the moment Elias knew they had been found again. But this time, there was no panic. No rushing to escape. They had prepared for this. The people of the hidden world came together. In a council under the old sky temple, where moss grew on stone and time felt slow, they listened to Elias and Salari explain everything: the visions, the attackers, the ancient temple, the royal sister, the old law. No one doubted them. They had seen the child's power with their own eyes, and so they decided not to run. Instead, they would build defenses, not just walls or weapons, but knowledge. Salari worked with old mystics and scholars to understand the child's energy. They found records written in strange starlight ink that described the Starborn, a child of both paths, who could bend light and shadow without fear. Elias trained with hunters and soldiers, learning how to move through forests, how to fight in silence, how to defend without anger. Others joined them: rogue scientists, outlaw engineers, ancient warrior monks, each bringing something the hidden world had lost. The village became stronger, faster, wiser. They built energy shields hidden in mountains, alarms carved into wind tunnels, in a sanctuary beneath the roots of the oldest tree on the planet. And the child grew. He walked early. He spoke words that no one had taught him. When he touched the soil, flowers bloomed. When he touched Ilias's face, old pain faded. Everyone could feel it now. This child wasn't just hope. He was change. Not a weapon, not a savior, but something more natural. It's like a missing part of the universe finding its way home. Then, one dusk, a ship came, small, silent, and marked. With the symbol of the ancient thrones, it hovered just beyond the edge of the village, making no move to land, no sign of threat. Elias stood at the hilltop with the child in his arms, Salary beside him. From the ship, a single figure stepped, outcloaked, unarmed, and old beyond belief. He bowed low, not to Elias, not to Salary, but to the child. He spoke softly. He said the galaxy was changing, cracks forming in places once believed unbreakable. He said the rulers now feared what they could not control, and what they could not control, they often tried to destroy. But he also said there were others hidden, watching who still believed in balance, in old truths, in light that didn't come from war. He offered no threat, only a warning. Soon a choice would come. Not just for the child, but for the world that protected him. A choice between silence or rising, between hiding or guiding. Then he left. The ship vanished. That night, as stars shimmered above, Elias looked into his son's eyes and felt no fear, only purpose. This was no longer just about survival. This was the beginning of something bigger. Movement, maybe even a message to the stars. The child didn't need to speak to change the world. He only needed to live. And Elias, Salari, and the strange family they had built around him would do everything to protect that right. Whatever came next, they were ready to face it together.